Hey everybody, it's Chris with Drop Dice. We are back this week. This video was actually intended for Wednesday. However, Google was having a lot of issues where it kept garbling my voice during the video. So I'm going to try it again today, and hopefully we don't have a lot of Google issues again. So basically, I have decided to stop doing the Wednesday World Builder series, and instead I wanted to kind of change up the pace, do something a little different. So I'm going to still do world building videos. They're just not going to be in a series every Wednesday anymore, or at least every Wednesday that I can get the time to anymore. Instead, what I'm going to do is a player series, which ideally, again, is going to be every Wednesday, barring situations that may get me stuck. But this series is actually going to be focused on the player side of the table. I tend to focus a little bit more on the GM side. So I wanted to kind of expand and bring in more of the player side of things to kind of bring that to light, because I think that a lot of channels do a good job of doing GM side, but not necessarily player side. So this is going to be kind of my ends as me as a player and some tips that can help out some, especially newer players, because most of all, or most people who are checking YouTube for content are usually newer players, not necessarily newer GMs. And so some of this content may be worthwhile for you. So the first video that I have is 5 basic tips. These are going to be my kind of kickstart off the series, my quick pick tips. Some of these require a little bit further discussion, but I'm going to kind of explain why I think that they're valuable and what you can do with them. So first off, number 1 is pick a high concept. So this comes from Fate and probably some other games before that, but Fate is the one that everybody recognizes the term high concept from. Essentially what it is you think about what your character is and you try and describe it in either a phrase, a sentence, or a few words. So like instead of and it can range. So the idea is you want it to be something that can be both positive and negative. So and define your character as something unique without being like too much of a special snowflake. So with high concept, what you do is essentially you think, okay, I want to be a ranger. So my initial high concept is just he's a ranger. But it's like, well, I want something more than just a ranger. So you start playing with it and you look through the rules and you kind of figure out some stuff you can do. And maybe instead of being a ranger by the time you're done, and for example, in a Legend of Five Rings game that I'm planning on, my high concept is a one-armed animal handling Cooney witch hunter, which sounds crazy to say it all out loud, but that's basically what he is he has one arm, he does animal handling, and he's got a lot of ranger-like qualities, but he professionally is a Cooney witch hunter. So it gives me this idea of, okay, I know who he is, what he's like, and the cool thing is when he does his Cooney witch hunter thing, maybe he does it a little bit differently because he's a Toritaka, not a Cooney from his family. Maybe he's a little bit more of like a huntsman kind of deal. Like he will follow you or the tainted creature to the ends of the earth kind of deal. And that's kind of the concept that I came up with. The one arm is actually a little story, and we'll kind of get into that as we go along. I'm actually going to do the 5 points with him in the background as kind of an example of each of these points. So point number 2, or tip number 2, I should say, is write for the story you want to play and make room to evolve. So a lot of players tend to, when they first start the game, they have this idea of who their character is going to be ultimately. Like, let's say you play a supers game. You start building, you're like, I'm going to build Superman. Well, chances are you're not going to start as Superman, or at least Superman with all of his powers, because let's be frank, Superman is more than just eye blasts and flying around and super strong. He's also nigh invulnerable. He's faster than a speeding bullet. He flies. In some series, he can breathe, and he doesn't require oxygen. He has cold breath, heat vision, X-ray vision. Like that's a lot of powers to try and stack up on a beginning character, for example. So instead, write for the character that you want to become, and have a general idea. Don't be deterministic and say, well, he has to be Superman in the end. Let the story evolve who he is. Like, let's say you start building a Superman-like character, and he gets to the point where he's captured the same bad guy 4 times in a row and put him in jail, and the guy keeps getting out, and the government doesn't seem to be doing anything about it other than trying to lock him up and keep him up forever. Comic book logic. Does your Superman character then think, maybe lobotomy is the best solution? It doesn't kill them, but it does stop them from having these criminal tendencies. For example, the Cooney Witch Hunter that I'm writing is he's got these flaws, like he's got one arm, he's an animal handler. Well, the animal handler portion is kind of like an advantage. Well, he's a falconeer, but still, that the stuff that I wrote in there as advantages and disadvantages is the kind of story that I'm looking for. The fact that I picked a Cooney Witch Hunter, I'm looking for things to do that involve the taint and being able to explore that side of the game. So with that in mind, you know, it's helpful to the GM if you write stuff for the stuff that you want to play. A lot of groups tend to do this thing where they break down roles and they say, hey, we need a fighter, a cleric, a rogue, blah, blah, blah. I hate that, because what usually ends up happening, because I'm a very passive kind of guy about role playing, is everyone will pick out their roles. And usually the loudest and the guy who says we should pick roles is going to be the one who picks first. And he's going to pick, let's say, fighter or paladin or maybe a boisterous cleric, because that guy's going to be boisterous no matter what character role he picks. And he's going to cover the healing role or the warrior role. And then you're going to have another person who's going to jump in and be like, oh, I want to be the rogue type. Another person who's going to be like, oh, okay, I want to be the mage. And then me, because I'm really passive, and some players, especially new players, tend to fall into this trap too, is they tend to be the last one who gets to pick. And then they get, oh, well, you know, the rogue wasn't picked, so I guess that's what you have to be. I always hate that. A good GM will find ways for you to highlight the weaknesses of your group composition and give you moments to shine. So, like, if you're doing a dungeon delve and you don't have a rogue, because normally you guys don't dungeon delve, a good GM should provide venues for you to get past traps besides we just walk through them. But that's a whole different topic, more for the GM side than for the player side. Ultimately, what I'm saying is write the character you want to play. Don't feel cornered into like a role because the group said so. That always irks me really bad, especially when GMs are the ones that are like, oh, I want these filled, because it's not very fun for somebody who gets kind of the raw end of the deal and has to pick the last remaining role. The third tip I have for you is build up, don't just punch it in the face. So this is something that I see even with veteran players. So this is just a general tip here. Essentially, so you go through a scene and, you know, the bad guy reveals himself and he doesn't get to do anything yet. He probably hasn't done anything super evil in the campaign yet. He just kind of like shows up. But you're a smart player and you know that that's the bad guy. You know, launching an all-out assault on this guy right away tends to be counterproductive for storytelling. Now, it's very realistic that some people will do that, but you know, think about it like this. If you were playing, for example, something like Final Fantasy VII or 13 or whatever, some RPG on the computer, and you know, the bad guy shows up and he's on a bridge and it's a cutscene and you can't do anything to attack him. Now, if you just attacked him right there, killed him, that would be the end of the game. And all of those interesting points in the game after that, you would never have. So I do recommend that you have a little restraint when you play these games, because the restraint will allow the story to build up and become more. So like, let's say, you know, the bad guy shows up, he's on that bridge. Maybe you should just listen to him instead of trying to attack him. Now, this also carries over to stuff like role-playing scenes. You know, say you're in a scene where you come in and talk to the queen. Excuse me. You come in and talk to the queen, and you need troops to be able to fight off these orcs. Instead of just coming in there and being like, we demand troops. We got to fight these orcs. We got to do it right now. Right now. Like, there are times where that's appropriate. But let's say that, you know, you're trying to prep and get things ready for an assault that's going to come in the next month. You know, maybe instead of coming in there and being a blunt instrument, you should try and, you know, work the courtliness of it and try and gain favor. If you have time for it, it's worth doing. It helps build the story, and you're going to find that you enjoy the story a lot more because of that. Tip number 4 is don't say my character wouldn't do that. Instead, play to that factor. So this is a video that's gone around a little bit for the past couple of weeks where people were saying like, you know, that response of my character wouldn't do that is kind of crap. So Here's my personal thinking. There are times where my player wouldn't do that, or my character wouldn't do that. Is a appropriate response. It is very rare, but here's the thing. How often do you do things that you don't want to do? Let's say, you get up, you know that you have to go to work at 6 a.m. You don't want to, but you still do because you still have to have money to live. Now, if your players are in a situation where they can avoid it and they can just simply go, I don't want to do that, then that's fine. But sometimes it's nice to play to the fact that you didn't want to do that. Instead, like, go and delve into that dungeon of abominable monsters, and pick up the rune that very obviously looks evil, and hold it and play with it for a little bit. Because what you can do, instead of just being like, I don't want to do this, and then not doing it, you can do the adventure and then have the fun of being the guy that was like, I told you we shouldn't have come down here. They're spirits. They're gonna haunt us. They're gonna follow us. We're cursed. You could be that guy. It's totally fun, and it's worth exploring. Tip number 5 is add to the story. So this one is also a GM thing normally, but this is how a player can do it. Normally, a GM who's doing his job correctly should be like, hey, what does this look like? What do you think this is? Why don't you describe your attack for me? He's going to do things like that and kind of prompt you to add descriptors to the story and kind of add to it overall. If your GM doesn't, here's my trick to help you turn it around and encourage your GM to start doing it. Because if you start adding descriptors and adding to the story, you're going to notice that the other players around you are going to enjoy that and they're going to build on it. Now, there is a point where you can get overly dramatic and you can become too much for the table. So, use it sparingly. You guys are all intelligent people, so use it appropriately for your group. There's no magic, this much is appropriate kind of answer. So let's say your GM is like, okay, he rolls an attack on you, and let's see, that is a 19. That hits your armor class. He's going to do 8 points of damage. Now, that wasn't very entertaining. Normally a good GM will be like, oh, he lunges in and he swings his sword. Roll the dice for the attack. And it makes connection with your shoulder, and it just tears right through your clothing and causes blood to spurt up. He does 8 points of damage. Like, that kind of descriptor is normally what you would hope to see in a game. Well, let's say your GM is just doing number crunching, and he's like, oh, it's a 19 to hit, you take 8 points of damage. This is how you can turn it around. On your turn, instead, think about martial arts movies. And bear with me here. So he slashes into your shoulder. What you do during your next turn is you go, oh, okay, how about this? My character is going to take advantage of the fact that he has slashed into me. And as his sword is kind of buried in, I'm just going to pull my knife and stab it into his gut. So roll for the attack. That's an 18 plus whatever modifiers are. Let's say it's a 22. That definitely hits the bad guy. And then, you roll it, and it's going to be 4 points of damage plus strength. So 5 points of damage to him, using D&D as the example, since that's the most universally known system. So then, you do that damage to the bad guy, and you're adding to the scene of what's going on. If your GM does tell you, this is actually the best part. So I love monks because monks are a lot of fun. I love martial arts movies, and I can add to it. If my GM goes, oh, he gets a 19 and does 8 points of damage, and he doesn't tell me how the attack goes, I instead take the reins and I say how that attack went and what I did to counter it during my turn. So GM attacks me and I'm playing a monk. This is what I do is, so the attack where he goes to hit me, it was, a whatever weapon that character that NPC or monster has. Like, let's say it's a claw attack. It was a claw attack that buried into my shoulder and it stings with pain, but I shoulder back up and I go in with a swift punch to his chin. Like, that sort of thing. Like, you can add to that, and it's totally welcomed at games, and it will help other players get involved, and you're going to see that your story evolves because of it. So this also works if they miss you. So back to my martial arts example, say somebody comes in to attack you and the GM doesn't narrate it. He's like, oh, it's a 10 to attack. It misses you, moves over to your turn. You'd be like, oh, well, during his attack, what he was actually doing is he ran across the courtyard to me and he was trying to fly and kick me. But due to my training, I actually counter it. And roll your dice, and it's like, oh, okay, I got a 16. Does that hit? It does. So your counter is you know, the martial arts movie where one guy comes up and he kicks, and then the other guy turns around and like kicks him right in the stomach and knocks him to the ground. Like, you can narrate that. So it's like, he ran across the courtyard, kicked me in the face. Due to my training, I dropped down into a lower stance and then wing my front foot around and knock him in the chest to the ground, or just knock him in the chest if you don't have a system that allows you to knock someone down as part of your attack. You know, just narrate to add flavor and do things. You're going to notice that the other players around you will start to enjoy that, and you're going to get more out of your games for that. I think tip number 5 and tip number 1 are actually the best in this series, that high concept and adding to the story. The other stuff kind of comes along as you play. So if you can keep at least those 2 in mind, you can start adding the other 3, and you're going to be rocking out and being a fantastic player in no time. There are a couple other videos online. Matt Click does a 5 basic player tips as well video. His video is probably the most popular one online. If you haven't seen it, make sure you check that out. I will put a link to it inside this video, inside the cards section. I did have a question about cards on one of my videos. Cards will show up in one of these corners. It'll look like an eye. If you click on that eye, it'll open up, and then there will be a little link to the video inside there, and it'll open up inside a new window. That being said, for anybody who's interested in Providence, I'm going to do another video later today talking about where I'm at in the project, because I feel like I'm at a good point that I really want to start talking about it on the channel. But check it out on the website, dropdice.com. I'm going to be adding some more Fantasy Age stuff because that's become a little bit more popular, and it sounds like Legend of the Five Rings stuff is grown in popularity too, which we'll talk about during Community Saturday. That is all I have for this video. Again, this was supposed to be Wednesday, but Google problems, so kind of bear with me. There should be a new video this upcoming Wednesday. As always, feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys at the gaming table.